My name is Sophia. I'm 41 years old, and for 7 long years, I lived under the shadow of a narcissist who stole my happiness piece by piece until I could barely recognize myself. This is not a love story. It is a narcissist true story, and it is my confession. For years, I smiled to the outside world, while inside I was trapped in an invisible prison of control, manipulation, and humiliation. I want to tell it because maybe someone out there will hear my voice and realize they are not crazy, they are not alone, and what they are living is abuse. From the very beginning, he seemed to know how to silence my joy. He didn't scream at first. He didn't hit me. No, his weapons were sharper than fists. His weapons were words, glances, pauses, the cold wall of silence he would build whenever I dared to be myself. I used to be a woman who laughed loudly, who found joy in small things. I loved music, cooking, and dancing around the kitchen with my daughter. But soon after meeting him, that laughter became a problem. "You laugh too much. People think you're desperate," he whispered one night after I came back from a family dinner. My happiness, something so natural and harmless, became ammunition for him to use against me. At first, I brushed it off. I thought maybe he was just tired or insecure, but it wasn't a one-time comment. Every smile, every laugh, every little burst of life I showed was met with criticism. "You're fake. You're childish. You're embarrassing." Those words started sinking into my skin like poison. This was the beginning of the narcissist control. It was subtle enough that I couldn't name it yet, but powerful enough that I began dimming my own light. This is how narcissist abuse begins. Not with obvious attacks, but with invisible cuts. Silence was his favorite punishment. Whenever I did something that displeased him, sometimes as small as wearing a colorful dress or speaking too much when we had guests, he would stop talking to me. Hours would turn into days of silence, an icy wall where my words simply fell and vanished. I begged. I cried. I tried to guess what I had done wrong. His silence was louder than shouting. It was emotional abuse, a form of psychological abuse that kept me spinning in confusion. I didn't realize at the time that this was the start of a gaslighting story. I thought I was the one failing him. He had a way of twisting my words until I doubted my own voice. If I said I was tired, he'd say, "No, you're not tired. You're lazy." If I said I felt hurt, he'd answer, "You're too sensitive. You imagine insults where there are none." Slowly, my reality was rewritten by his. This is the cruelty of narcissist manipulation. You stop trusting your own memory, your own feelings. The lies and betrayal are not always about cheating. Sometimes the betrayal is in how they steal your very perception of truth. I remember one day I found lipstick on his shirt. My heart stopped. When I asked about it, he laughed. That cruel laugh I can still hear echoing inside my head. "That's yours. You're so dramatic. You smear makeup everywhere and then accuse me." I knew deep down it wasn't mine, but his conviction was stronger than my own memory. I walked away doubting myself. That's how living with a narcissist destroys you. You stop believing in your own reality. The escalation came slowly, but when it came, it was brutal. He no longer hid his contempt in whispers. He humiliated me in front of others. At a dinner with friends, he interrupted me mid-sentence to say, "Don't listen to her. She doesn't know what she's talking about." I laughed nervously, pretending it was a joke, but inside I wanted to disappear. My self-worth was stripped away piece by piece. This toxic relationship turned me into a shadow of who I once was. On my 40th birthday, I thought maybe he would soften. I hoped, stupidly, that there would be a moment of tenderness. Instead, when my friends gathered to surprise me, he leaned close and whispered in my ear, "You don't deserve happiness. You should thank me you even have people here." I smiled for the group photo, but inside I shattered. That night, I cried myself to sleep beside the man who was supposed to love me. This is what narcissist isolation feels like, surrounded by people, yet completely alone. Why did I stay? I ask myself that question 1,000 times. I stayed because he convinced me no one else would love me. I stayed because he tied my worth to his approval. I stayed because of fear and shame. I told myself I was strong enough to handle it, that maybe tomorrow would be better, that maybe he would change. That invisible prison is built with lies, manipulation, and the hope that never comes true. I know now that he only loved me when I was broken. He only fed on me when I was small, quiet, diminished. My happiness was his enemy, so he stole it from me every day, until I became a hollow version of myself. This is my narcissist confession. It's painful, it's humiliating, but it's real. And I refuse to let my story stay silent any longer. He stole my happiness, but he hasn't stolen my voice. I used to think that the worst part of living with a narcissist would be the visible abuse, the shouting, the insults, the open humiliation. But I learned that what truly destroys you is the invisible part, the slow drip of doubt that poisons your mind every single day. That is the heart of a gaslighting story, and it's what he did to me for 7 years. There were nights when he would deliberately move objects around the house, my keys, my wallet, even my daughter's school books, then watch me search in panic. When I finally asked if he had seen them, he would shrug and say, "You're so forgetful, Sophia. You're losing your mind." Over and over, these small manipulations built a reality where I couldn't trust myself. Imagine waking up each morning unsure if your memories are real. That is what narcissist manipulation feels like. It's not just lies. It's the rewriting of your own life while you're still living it. The lies and betrayal came in waves. He promised he would stop drinking, but every week I found bottles hidden in the garage. When I confronted him, he turned it back on me. "You're paranoid. Do you think I need alcohol to deal with you? You're the reason I drink." Those words were daggers. In that toxic relationship, everything became my fault. If he cheated, it was because I wasn't enough. If he yelled, it was because I provoked him. If he disappeared for hours without explanation, it was because I was too controlling. That's the twisted irony of narcissist control. They destroy your freedom while convincing you that you are the one chaining them. One night, I discovered a series of text messages on his phone from another woman. My hand shook as I read her words, intimate, mocking, as if she knew she was taking something from me. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't need someone else." I felt my chest collapse. That wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation, a deliberate knife to my heart. I stayed silent because I knew if I cried, he would call me weak, and if I screamed, he would call me crazy. That silence swallowed me whole. The escalation of abuse became impossible to hide. Friends noticed how quiet I had become. My mother asked why I never visited anymore. The truth was that he isolated me from everyone who loved me. If I planned a visit to my family, he suddenly became sick or started a fight so intense that I canceled my plans just to avoid more chaos. Over time, I stopped trying. That's what narcissist isolation does. It cuts every lifeline until the only person left in your world is the one who hurts you the most. Public humiliation became his sport. At a work party, he told my colleagues, "Sophia doesn't understand anything about business. She's just good at cooking." Everyone laughed awkwardly, thinking it was a joke, but I saw the cruelty in his eyes. Later, when I told him how embarrassed I felt, he said, "You're too sensitive. No one cares what you think." That sentence replayed in my head for months. I began to believe it. Emotional abuse doesn't need bruises to leave scars. It leaves them inside your soul. He had a special way of turning birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays into weapons. On our anniversary, instead of celebrating, he spent the day criticizing me. "7 years wasted," he said coldly, "and you still haven't become the woman I want." I cried quietly in the bathroom, staring at my reflection and wondering who I had become. On Christmas, he gave me nothing and said, "You don't deserve gifts. You should be grateful I tolerate you." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. The invisible prison was already locked around me. I stayed because I was afraid. Afraid of starting over at 41, afraid of raising my daughter alone, afraid of the shame if people discovered the truth of my marriage. Fear and shame are the bars of the invisible prison built by narcissist abuse. But it wasn't only fear, it was also hope. The hope that maybe one day he would look at me the way he once did. The hope that maybe I could fix things if I just tried harder. That hope is poison disguised as love. Every morning, I woke up with the same thought. Maybe today will be different. But each day was the same cycle of manipulation, control, and humiliation. He stole my laughter, my confidence, my friendships, and my sense of safety. He stole my happiness and left me hollow. Living with a narcissist is like drowning in plain sight. People see you, but they don't realize you can't breathe. I remember one night sitting alone in the dark after another fight, holding my chest because it felt like my heart would burst. I whispered to myself, I can't live like this. And yet the next morning, I pretended everything was fine. That's the paradox of a toxic relationship. You know it's killing you, but you're too broken to leave. I often think back to who I was before him. I was not perfect, but I was alive. I had light in my eyes, music in my steps, laughter that came easily. Now, when I look at old photos, I barely recognize the woman smiling at the camera. She feels like a stranger. That's the cruelest part of narcissist abuse. It doesn't just ruin your relationship. It ruins your identity. It makes you question if you will ever be whole again. And yet, even in the middle of all the darkness, there was a small voice inside me that whispered, this is not love. Love is not supposed to feel like humiliation, like fear, like isolation. Love is not supposed to be an invisible prison. That voice was weak, but it kept me alive. It told me that maybe, just maybe, one day I could walk away. This is my narcissist confession, my emotional abuse story, my truth. It hurts to speak it, but silence hurts more. For 7 years, I was trapped by a narcissist who fed on my joy, drained my spirit, and controlled every piece of my life. He stole my happiness, but he did not steal my soul. My soul is still here, bruised but breathing, waiting for the day it can finally be free. There were moments when I truly believed I was going insane. That's the most destructive part of living with a narcissist. You don't just suffer abuse, you begin to doubt your own reality. He was skilled at twisting every conversation, every memory, until I no longer trusted my own mind. This wasn't just emotional abuse. It was psychological abuse, crafted with precision. Sometimes, late at night, he would wake me up and start arguments about things that never happened. You said you wanted to leave me, he accused one night, his eyes cold and sharp. I swore I never said such a thing, but he insisted. Don't lie, I remember. You begged me for freedom. I lay there in confusion, my heart racing, searching my memory, terrified that maybe I had forgotten. That was his power, making me believe his lies over my own truth. That's the essence of a gaslighting story. You start to believe the abuser's script more than your own. The lies and betrayal extended to every corner of my life. He told our friends I was unstable, exaggerating everything. He told his family I was ungrateful, a burden. He told me I was lucky he stayed, because no one else would ever tolerate me, and I believed him. That is what narcissist manipulation does. It strips you of any self-worth until you cling to the very person who is destroying you. There was a day I tried to fight back. I told him I wanted to leave, that I couldn't handle the control and humiliation anymore. He stared at me with a cruel smirk and said, "Go ahead, but don't expect anyone to want you. You're old, Sophia. You're broken. You're nothing without me." Those words crushed me. I was 41, but in his shadow I felt 100. He made me believe I was invisible to the world, that without him, I would vanish. That's how a narcissist builds an invisible prison. You don't see the bars, but you feel them in every decision you're too afraid to make. Even my body started betraying me. My hair began to fall out in clumps from stress. My chest ached constantly, as if my heart was under pressure. I suffered migraines that left me paralyzed in bed. He mocked me for it. "You're pathetic. Always sick, always complaining. No wonder no one likes you." Instead of compassion, I received contempt. And yet, I stayed. Because I thought maybe I was the problem. Because I thought maybe, if I just endured, he would one day change. That's the toxic hope of a toxic love. You sacrifice yourself for a miracle that never comes. The escalation of abuse was no longer hidden. He began shouting in public, insulting me where others could hear. In a grocery store, because I bought the wrong brand of cereal, he sneered, "Are you stupid, Sophia? Can't you do anything right?" People stared, but no one intervened. I laughed nervously, pretending it was nothing, but inside I crumbled. Public humiliation became normal. I stopped expecting respect. I stopped expecting kindness. I think the worst betrayal was not the cheating, not the insults, not even the isolation. The worst betrayal was how he destroyed my ability to feel joy. I used to find happiness in little things. A sunrise, the smell of fresh bread, a good book. But with him, even those moments were stolen. If I smiled at the sky, He said I looked foolish. If I sang while cooking, he told me to shut up. If I read a book, he mocked me. Do you really think you're smart enough to understand that? Slowly, I stopped smiling, stopped singing, stopped reading. The world became gray. That's what it means when I say the narcissist stole my happiness. It wasn't one big theft. It was thousands of tiny robberies until there was nothing left inside me. I became a ghost in my own house. I cooked, cleaned, fulfilled his demands, kept my head down. My daughter would ask me, "Mama, why are you sad?" And I couldn't answer. How do you explain to a child that the person you live with, the one who should protect you, is the one who is destroying you? I told her I was just tired, always tired. But the truth was I was suffocating in an invisible prison. The fear and shame kept me silent. I didn't tell friends because I thought they wouldn't believe me. I didn't tell family because I didn't want them to see how weak I was. I stayed because I was ashamed of being broken, ashamed of being trapped by a narcissist. Shame is the perfect cage. It keeps you from reaching out, keeps you hidden, keeps you suffering in silence. There were nights I thought about leaving. I imagined packing a bag, taking my daughter, and disappearing. But then the doubts crept in. Where would I go? How would I survive? Who would want me? He had planted those doubts so deeply that even my dreams of freedom were poisoned. That's the cruel genius of narcissist control. They don't just trap your body, they trap your mind. And yet, somewhere deep inside, there was still a flicker of resistance. A small part of me that whispered, "This isn't love. This isn't normal. This isn't your fault." That tiny voice was all I had left. It was weak, drowned out most days by his insults and manipulations, but it never completely disappeared. Maybe that was my soul, refusing to die. I wish I could tell you that I found a clear path to freedom, but I didn't. Not yet. This is not a happy ending. This is a narcissist confession, raw and unfinished. I am still learning how to breathe again, still fighting to remember who I am outside of his shadow. But I know one thing with certainty. He stole my happiness, but he cannot own my pain. My pain is mine, and in speaking it, I take back a small piece of myself. Maybe that is where healing begins. Not with escape, not with justice, but with confession. With saying out loud, I was trapped by a narcissist. I was humiliated, manipulated, controlled, and broken. But I am still here. And if I am still here, then maybe one day I can be free. There are nights I still wake up gasping, my chest tight as if his voice is still in the room. That's what trauma does. It doesn't vanish when the abuser walks out of the room. It lingers like smoke in your lungs. Living with a narcissist for 7 years carved fear into my bones. Even in silence, I sometimes hear him. Even when I am alone, I sometimes feel watched. That is the mark of psychological abuse. It brands you in places no one else can see. I think of the invisible prison often, how carefully it was built. At first, it was only small walls. His disapproval when I laughed too loudly, his silence when I expressed joy, his criticism when I wore clothes that made me feel beautiful. But then the walls grew higher. He began controlling what I wore, who I spoke to, where I went. If I wanted to meet a friend, he made me feel guilty. Why would you waste time with them when you should be with me? If I wanted to visit my mother, he said, you care about them more than your family here. Slowly, I stopped asking for permission, because asking meant opening the door to another fight. That's how isolation works. Not always by force, but by exhausting you until you give up trying. Sometimes I wonder if people noticed. Did they see how my smile faded over the years? Did they hear how quiet I became? I used to talk, to share stories, to laugh loudly. By the end, I barely spoke at all. I didn't trust my own words anymore. Every sentence felt dangerous, every opinion an opportunity for him to cut me down. That's how control eats you alive, not just by limiting your actions, but by shrinking your voice until silence feels safer. The escalation of abuse had no clear peak. It was a constant climb. Each year, he found new ways to humiliate me. At first, it was subtle digs in private. Then it became open insults in public. Later, it was betrayal so shameless it left me stunned. I once caught him messaging a woman in the middle of the night. When I confronted him, shaking with anger, he smiled calmly and said, "You're delusional. No one would want me anyway, except you." The cruelty wasn't in the denial. It was in the way he made me question what I had just seen with my own eyes. That's gaslighting. That's narcissist manipulation at its most vicious. And when I tried to resist, he always found a way to break me. If I raised my voice, he accused me of being hysterical. If I cried, he called me weak. If I stayed silent, he mocked me for being cold. There was no right way to exist around him. Everything was wrong. Everything was my fault. That endless cycle wore me down more than shouting ever could. It was psychological torture disguised as daily life. The fear became physical. My heart raced every time I heard his footsteps. I never knew what version of him would walk through the door, the charming one who pretended to care, or the cold one who tore me apart with words. That unpredictability was its own form of abuse. My body never relaxed. Even when he was calm, I stayed tense, waiting for the storm. That constant vigilance left me exhausted, drained of energy. I wasn't living. I was surviving. He made me feel worthless in ways that words alone can't explain. On my worst days, he looked at me with pure disgust and said, "You're nothing, Sophia. Nothing without me." And after hearing it enough times, I began to believe it. That's the cruelty of narcissist control. It convinces you that the very person destroying you is the only one keeping you alive. I stayed because I thought I had no choice. Financially, he had control. Emotionally, he had broken me. Spiritually, he had drained me. Fear and shame tied me down like chains. Shame told me I was too weak to leave. Fear told me I couldn't survive without him. Hope told me maybe he would change. Together, they locked me inside the invisible prison. But sometimes, even in the darkest cage, a spark flickers. For me, it was my daughter. She watched me silently, her young eyes soaking in everything I endured. One day, after he insulted me in front of her, she whispered, "Mama, why does he talk to you like that?" That question pierced through me more than his cruelty ever had, because in that moment I realized I was teaching her what love looks like. I was teaching her that a woman should accept humiliation, control, manipulation, and I couldn't bear that thought. I wish I could say I found the courage that day to leave, but I didn't. Not yet. Fear was stronger than clarity. Still, something shifted. I began to see the bars of the prison more clearly. I began to understand that I was not weak because I stayed. I stayed because I was trapped by a narcissist who built his power on my silence. Understanding that truth didn't set me free immediately, but it lit a small flame inside me. I remember writing in a secret notebook late at night, scribbling down every insult, every manipulation, every betrayal. It became my diary of pain. It was the only place where I didn't lie to myself. On those pages, I confessed the reality I couldn't speak aloud, that I was living with a narcissist, that I was trapped in a toxic relationship, that I was disappearing piece by piece. That notebook became my mirror. Every time I read it, I realized more clearly, this is not love, this is abuse. Still, the trauma runs deep. Even now, away from his presence, I sometimes hear his voice in my head. When I laugh too loudly, I feel shame. When I speak my opinion, I hesitate. That is the long shadow of emotional abuse. It lingers long after the abuser is gone. Healing is not a straight line. It's a battlefield inside your own mind. I tell this narcissist confession, not because I have a happy ending, but because I survived enough to speak. And maybe, survival is its own form of defiance. He stole my happiness, but he did not erase me completely. I am still here, broken, bruised, ashamed, but breathing. And maybe breathing is the first step back toward freedom. I don't know what tomorrow will look like. I don't know if I'll ever feel joy as I once did. But I know one thing. I don't want my daughter to grow up thinking this was love. I don't want her to inherit my silence. So I tell my story now, piece by painful piece, because the truth is all I have left. This is my narcissist true story. This is my confession. This is the invisible prison I lived in, and the slow awakening that tells me, maybe one day I can walk free. When I look back on those 7 years, it feels like my life was stolen and replaced with a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. It's hard to explain the depth of what narcissist abuse does to you. It's not just insults or betrayals, not just manipulation or humiliation. It's the way it rewrites your soul. I used to be filled with light, laughter, and purpose. By the time he was done with me, I was hollow. That's what I mean when I say the narcissist stole my happiness. He didn't just take away moments. He drained the very ability to feel joy. Even after he was gone, I still felt trapped by a narcissist who wasn't physically there anymore. That's the cruel part of psychological abuse. The cage follows you. His words echoed in my mind like a broken record. You're worthless. No one will ever want you. You're nothing without me. Sometimes I still hear them, especially when I stand in front of a mirror. That's the lasting damage of emotional abuse. You begin to carry your abuser's voice inside your own. For months after leaving, I found myself walking on eggshells even when no one was around. I'd hold back opinions, hesitate before laughing, flinch when someone raised their voice. I realized that I was still living by his rules, even though he was no longer in my house. That's what a toxic relationship does. It programs you. It turns you into your own warden, carrying the invisible prison inside you long after the door is open. Some scars are obvious. My health is not what it used to be. Anxiety sits in my chest like a permanent weight. My sleep is broken. I wake up in the middle of the night from nightmares where he's still there, smirking, telling me I'll never escape. But the worst scars are the invisible ones. The way I distrust kindness, the way I question every compliment, the way I feel small even when no one is trying to make me small. That's the mark of narcissist manipulation. It lingers, whispering lies in your head, even when the voice itself is gone. There are moments when shame overwhelms me. I ask myself why I stayed, why I let it go on for 7 years. People who've never lived with a narcissist don't understand. They think you're weak, that you could just walk away. But the truth is, when you're trapped by a narcissist, walking away feels impossible. Fear and shame hold you tighter than any lock or chain. I stayed because I was afraid. I stayed because I believed his lies. I stayed because I thought love meant sacrifice, even when the sacrifice was my soul. And yet, there is also guilt. Not just shame, but guilt. Guilt that my daughter saw too much, heard too much. Guilt that she watched her mother shrink, watched her light dim, watched her endure humiliation in silence. That guilt keeps me awake at night, because I know children don't just listen to what we say. They absorb what we live. And I gave her the wrong lesson about love. I can't erase that. I can only hope that one day, when she's older, she'll understand why I stayed, and maybe she'll forgive me. Sometimes people talk about healing as if it's a straight road, but it's not. Healing after narcissist abuse is a maze. Some days I feel strong, ready to rebuild. Other days, I feel like I'm still in that house, still waiting for the sound of his footsteps, still bracing for the next insult. Trauma doesn't leave just because you leave the abuser. Trauma stays. Healing is not forgetting. It's learning to live with the scars. I confess this story because silence was the weapon he used to control me. For years, I said nothing. I smiled in public. I lied to friends. I hid the bruises that weren't physical, but cut just as deep. That silence was my cage. Speaking now feels dangerous, but it also feels like freedom. Maybe not full freedom, but a crack in the prison wall. I don't know if I'll ever be the woman I was before. Maybe she's gone forever. But maybe, just maybe, I can become someone new. Someone who knows what it feels like to be broken and still chooses to stand. Someone who can tell the truth without fear. Someone who understands that love is not supposed to feel like fear, shame, control, or humiliation. This is not a recovery story. This is not a happy ending. This is my narcissist confession, my emotional abuse story, my truth. For 7 years, I was trapped in a toxic love. Isolated, manipulated, humiliated, and drained. For 7 years, I lived in an invisible prison. And even now, I carry the trauma, the fear, the shame. But I also carry the truth. And maybe the truth is enough to keep me alive. He stole my happiness. He shattered my spirit. But he did not erase me completely. I am still here. I am still breathing. And I will not let my voice be stolen. Maybe that is the beginning of freedom.